Jack's eyes opened slowly, and for a moment he didn't know where he was. The air felt strange, heavy but clean, and the ceiling above him glowed faint blue. It wasn't like any light he had seen before. His head throbbed, and when he tried to sit up, a wave of dizziness hit him. The surface beneath him was smooth, almost like glass, but warm to the touch. He blinked and looked around. The room was small, square, and completely empty except for him. There were no windows, no chairs, no visible door, just walls that seemed alive, pulsing faintly with light. A low humming sound came from somewhere above, steady and almost calming, yet the silence beneath it felt unnatural. Jack swallowed, his mouth dry. The last thing he remembered was walking home after a long shift at the repair docks. And then, nothing. His heart began to beat faster. He wasn't on Earth. The hum stopped. For a few seconds, there was no sound at all. Then, with a hiss, part of the wall slid open like liquid metal, forming an archway. Jack's breath caught. A figure stepped inside. She was tall, slim but not fragile, her skin carrying a silver sheen that shifted slightly as she moved. Her eyes were a bright amber, glowing faintly in the dim blue light, and her hair, if it was hair, fell in thin, shimmering strands down her shoulders. She stopped a few feet away from him and tilted her head, studying him like one might study a strange animal. Her movements were slow, deliberate. Jack opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, she leaned closer. The scent of her was unlike anything he had known, sweet but sharp, like cold metal mixed with flowers. Her lips curved slightly, and in a low, almost questioning voice, she said, "A what?" Jack frowned. "What?" he echoed. Her smile deepened, and she took one step closer until her knees nearly touched his. She placed a hand against the wall beside his head, leaning down so close he could see faint patterns etched on her skin, patterns that shimmered when she breathed. She repeated the words, slower this time. "A what?" Then, without warning, her voice shifted into a sound that wasn't quite a word. A rolling, deep, vibrating purr. A grrr. Jack's body went rigid. The sound wasn't just in his ears, it seemed to hum inside his chest, like her voice had reached into him. He felt the vibrations through his ribs, his heartbeat skipping for a moment. He couldn't tell if it was a threat, a warning, or something else entirely. The way she looked at him while making that sound made his skin prickle. Before he could ask anything, the walls around them flickered, the blue light flashing red. A deep alarm began to echo through the space, low and urgent. The floor trembled beneath them as if the whole place had been struck by something massive. Jack grabbed the edge of the platform he had been lying on to steady himself. Her eyes narrowed. She turned her head sharply toward the open doorway, listening. The faint purring was gone now, replaced by a quick, sharp breath. In an instant, she reached down and grabbed Jack's hand. Her grip was surprisingly strong for someone so thin. "Move," she said, her voice firm. Jack hesitated, his mind full of questions, but the urgency in her tone left no room for argument. She pulled him to his feet, and his legs felt weak, unsteady. Still holding his hand, she dragged him toward the doorway. As they stepped into the corridor, Jack saw walls covered in strange markings, glowing faintly under the shifting red light. The air smelled different here, hotter, tinged with something sharp like burning wires. They ran, her long strides forcing Jack to keep up. His bare feet slapped against the smooth floor, the hum of alarms chasing them. Every few steps, she glanced back at him, her eyes scanning him quickly, almost protectively, but also as if checking for something only she understood. "Where are we? What's happening?" he demanded between breaths. She didn't answer. Instead, she turned sharply down another corridor, the walls here darker, the light dimmer. Somewhere far behind them, heavy footsteps echoed. Jack looked over his shoulder, but saw only shifting shadows. The vibrations of the alarm seemed to thrum in his bones now, mixing strangely with the memory of her earlier purr. That sound still lingered in his head, curling in the edges of his thoughts. They turned another corner, and Jack noticed her grip tightening when the footsteps grew louder. Her head snapped toward the noise, and for a second, her lips curled in a way that was almost animal. "Faster," she hissed, and they both began to sprint. The corridor ended abruptly in a tall door covered with glowing blue lines. She pressed her palm to the center, and the lines shifted like water, pulling apart to let them through. Inside was a smaller room, the walls thicker, the light softer. The door slid shut behind them with a deep, heavy thud. Jack bent over, breathing hard, but she didn't let go of his hand. Instead, she moved close again, her face only inches from his. The amber of her eyes seemed brighter now. She studied him for a long moment, then repeated in a softer tone, "A grrr." This time, her hand moved to rest on his chest, right over his heart. The purr rolled through her throat again, and Jack's breath caught. He didn't know why, but he felt something change inside him. Like the sound carried more than just noise, like it was meant for him in a way he couldn't explain. He wanted to ask her what it meant, but before he could, the footsteps outside stopped. A shadow fell across the seam of the door, and a deep voice spoke in a language Jack didn't understand. Her eyes snapped to the door. The purr faded instantly, replaced by a sharp, tense stillness. She reached to her side and pulled out a small, curved blade that caught the light, and she placed it in Jack's hand. He stared at it, confused, but her gaze was steady. "You hold," she said, the words awkward but clear enough. Jack's heart pounded. The voice outside spoke again, louder this time. Her fingers brushed over his as she pushed the blade into his grip. For some reason, the warmth of her hand made him feel less afraid, but the tension in her eyes told him whatever was coming would not be easy. Somewhere deep inside, the echo of that strange purr still moved in his chest, and Jack couldn't tell if it was meant to protect him or to claim him. The room was quiet except for the slow, rhythmic sound of Jack's breathing. He still held the curved blade she had given him, the metal feeling strange and unfamiliar in his hand. The woman, no, the alien, stood near the door, her head tilted slightly, listening for any sound outside. Her posture was tense, like a wild animal ready to spring. Jack tried to speak, but his voice came out low and uncertain. "Who are you? What's happening?" She turned to face him, her amber eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. For a moment, she didn't answer. Then she stepped closer, her gaze fixed directly on his face. She said something in her own language, the words sharp and flowing, mixed with soft growls and that strange purring sound. Jack shook his head. "I don't understand you." She frowned slightly and tried again, this time slower, but still using the same strange mix of tones. Her voice rose and fell in a rhythm that was almost hypnotic. Jack felt his pulse match her speech without meaning to. Then she stopped suddenly and repeated the sound from before, the one that had made him freeze earlier. "A grrr." Her hand lifted and pressed gently against his chest, right over his heart. He could feel the warmth of her palm through the thin fabric of his shirt. The purr rolled through her throat again, and he felt it vibrating deep inside him. It wasn't like any touch he had experienced. It carried something heavy, almost like meaning. Jack stepped back slightly, breaking the contact. "What does that mean? A grrr? Is that your name?" She tilted her head again, as if puzzled by his question. Then she spoke another short phrase in her language and gestured to herself, then to him. Her long fingers moved in quick shapes, pointing, circling, touching her chest, then touching his. Jack's brow furrowed. It almost looked like she was trying to tell him they were linked. Before he could ask, the walls gave a faint tremor. Distant footsteps echoed again, but not as close as before. She didn't seem alarmed this time. Instead, she moved to a small device in the corner of the room. It was a thin, metallic slab, hovering in the air without touching the floor. She waved her hand over it, and a glowing map appeared. The map was full of twisting corridors and bright red dots moving slowly through them. She pointed to one of the dots and looked at Jack. "Them," she said in broken English, her accent wrapping strangely around the words. Then she pointed to another blinking mark, blue this time, and then to her own chest. "Me." Jack pointed to the blue mark. "That's you?" She nodded, then tapped another smaller mark that had appeared right next to hers on the map. She looked directly at him, then tapped his chest. "You." Jack blinked. "So we're both here. Together. Yeah, I get that." She frowned, clearly frustrated at his lack of understanding. She turned off the map with a sharp motion and stepped toward him again. Her fingers brushed his arm, sliding down to his hand, and she placed his palm over her chest. Her heartbeat was fast, strong. She held his hand there and said, "A grrr," once more, slowly and with an intensity that made him feel like the words were more than sound. They were a declaration. He tried to pull his hand back, but she held it firmly in place. Her eyes didn't leave his. Jack realized she was waiting for him to respond. A grrr," he said awkwardly. Her expression changed instantly. She smiled, not just with her mouth, but in her eyes too. She made a low, satisfied purr and stepped back, as if his attempt had confirmed something. Jack's confusion deepened. Whatever a grrr meant, it was important to her. A sudden, metallic clang outside the door made them both turn. Jack gripped the blade tighter. She looked at him, then shook her head. She tapped her temple, then mimed lowering the weapon. Reluctantly, he did as she asked, keeping it at his side. She moved closer to the door, pressing her ear to it. The footsteps passed by without stopping. When the sounds faded, she turned back to him and began making more gestures. She pointed to her eyes, then to his, then mimed walking. Jack guessed she wanted them to move. "But where?" he asked. She tapped her chest again. Need, temple, she said slowly, forming the words like they were heavy in her mouth. Then she repeated, "A grrr," and touched his chest. Jack tried to piece it together. She needed to get somewhere, and for some reason, she needed him to come. She thought he was this a grrr thing, whatever it meant. The way she looked at him made him uneasy, not because it was hostile, but because it was so certain, like she had already decided what he was to her before he even knew her name. Her hands moved again, fast this time. She mimed danger, claws, fangs, and something falling. Then she pointed to herself, to him, and made a locking motion with her fingers, as if to say they were bound together. Jack exhaled slowly. "You think I'm supposed to protect you?" She tilted her head, her expression unreadable, then smiled faintly and nodded once. She stepped back toward the floating map, activated it again, and pointed to a blinking green mark far from their current position. "Temple," she said. Then she tapped her chest, tapped his, and repeated, "Go." He was about to argue, to tell her he didn't even know how he ended up here, but her sudden change in tone stopped him. She took a step closer, lowering her voice into that strange purring again. The sound slid into him like warm electricity, making his skin tighten and his chest feel strangely lighter. She looked at him with such focus it was as if she could see right through him. Jack didn't understand her language, but he was starting to understand something else. When she purred, it wasn't random. It was a way to make him feel things, to push away his fear, to make him want to follow. She stopped purring, took his hand again, and pulled him toward the door. This time, he didn't resist. Whatever a grrr meant, he had a feeling he was about to find out, whether he wanted to or not. The hallway outside was darker now, the red lights dimming to a pulsing glow that came and went like a slow heartbeat. Jack followed close behind her, the blade still in his hand. The air felt warmer here, heavy with the smell of metal and something faintly burned. Every step echoed too loudly against the smooth floor, making him uneasy. She moved fast but silent, her long strides purposeful, her head turning sharply at each corner to check for danger. The sound of footsteps came again, this time closer and heavier. Jack froze, glancing over his shoulder. Shadows moved in the far distance, shapes too large to be human. His stomach tightened. Whoever they weren't friendly. She reached for the small device on her wrist, a thin band of dark metal with glowing symbols. She tapped it, and a blue screen appeared in the air above it. Jack caught a glimpse of moving dots again, red ones spreading across the map, closing in from different directions. She made a soft clicking sound in her throat, clearly displeased. "They're after you," Jack whispered. She turned her head sharply toward him, her amber eyes catching the light. She pointed to herself, then to him, and shook her head. "Us," she said simply, her voice low. The meaning sank in slowly. They weren't just after her. Whoever these soldiers were, they wanted him too. Jack didn't understand why. He wasn't important, just a dock worker back on Earth. He had no weapons training, no secrets worth chasing him across a ship. But the way she looked at him told him there was more to this than he knew. They moved again, turning down another corridor. This one was narrower, the walls lined with panels that glowed faintly. Jack's eyes kept darting to the shadows, expecting one of those red dots to appear in real life. Then he noticed something strange. Every time they passed a wall panel, she would glance at him out of the corner of her eye, almost like she was checking to see if he noticed something. Once, her gaze lingered on his neck, making him uneasy. "What are you looking at?" he asked quietly. She didn't answer, just kept walking. The footsteps behind them grew louder, more urgent. A sharp metallic clang rang out. Someone had opened a door nearby. She grabbed Jack's arm, and pulled him through a side passage, pressing him against the wall. The shadows of the soldiers passed at the far end, their bodies outlined by faint armor lights. Jack could hear the clink of metal as they moved. She stayed close to him, so close he could hear her breathing. Then she whispered something in her own language, the purring sound slipping into it again, softer this time, almost comforting. Her hand pressed briefly against his chest, then she stepped in front of him, positioning herself so that she was half shielding him. Jack frowned. She was hiding behind him earlier in the first room, but now she was protecting him. Or maybe both. The soldier's shadows faded. She turned back to him, meeting his eyes for a brief second before pulling him onward again. They descended a short metal ramp into another corridor. This one had windows along one side, thin slits showing a vast stretch of black space outside, dotted with stars. The sight reminded Jack how far from home he was, how impossible it would be to run. They came to a stop at a heavy door with glowing locks. She touched the panel, but it stayed shut, flashing a warning symbol. She growled under her breath, then turned to him. "You try." Jack hesitated. "Me? I don't know how to open alien doors." She stepped closer, her eyes searching his face as if deciding something. Then she took his hand and placed it against the panel. To his surprise, the glow under his palm shifted instantly from red to green. The locks clicked and the door slid open. Jack stared. "How?" She didn't explain, just pushed him inside. The room beyond was filled with crates and containers stacked to the ceiling. The lights were dim here, casting deep shadows between the rows. She pulled him into one of the narrow gaps and crouched low. Jack listened. The soldiers were still moving nearby, their boots striking the floor in a steady rhythm. He could almost picture them scanning every corridor, every room. She turned to him again and touched the blade in his hand, adjusting his grip until he held it properly. Her own weapon was a longer, sleeker blade that shimmered faintly in the low light. She made a quick gesture. "Stay quiet. Be ready." Jack swallowed hard. His palms were damp, but he nodded. The sound of boots grew louder again. Shadows moved at the entrance of the storage room. She tensed beside him, every muscle ready to spring. Jack could hear his own heartbeat in his ears. A soldier stepped inside, tall and broad, his armor glowing with faint red lines. His face was hidden behind a visor, but his movements were sharp and deliberate. He scanned the room slowly, his weapon raised. She didn't move. Jack didn't breathe. The soldier took another step inside, then another. He passed close to their hiding place, his shadow falling over them. Jack tightened his grip on the blade, unsure if he should strike or stay still. Her hand brushed his, stopping him from moving. She leaned close to his ear and whispered a single word in her own language, followed by the purr again, low, steady, vibrating through him. His fear lessened instantly, replaced by a strange calm. The soldier moved on, disappearing into another aisle. She waited a few seconds, then pulled Jack up and led him toward a small hatch at the back of the storage room. It opened with a soft click, revealing a narrow passage barely wide enough for them to crawl. She gestured for him to go first. Jack hesitated, but she gave him a look that said there was no time to argue. He climbed in, the metal cold against his palms. She followed close behind, her presence filling the tight space. They moved through the tunnel for several minutes, the noise of the soldiers fading behind them. Jack was still thinking about the way the door had opened for him, and the way her purring had taken his fear away. He didn't know what a grrr really was, but whatever it meant, it was pulling him deeper into a danger he didn't understand. The narrow passage ended in a grate that looked out into another corridor. She signaled for Jack to stay low as she studied the view outside. The red warning lights were weaker here, replaced by a soft white glow, but the sound of distant movement told him the danger wasn't over. She tapped the grate lightly, then slid it open without a sound. Jack climbed out first, gripping his blade tightly. The floor was smooth and cold beneath his feet. She landed silently beside him, her weapon already in her hand. For a brief moment, there was no sound except their breathing. Then, somewhere ahead, came the sharp metallic clatter of boots. She moved forward, keeping close to the wall. Jack followed, his nerves tight. Every corner they turned felt like it could reveal an ambush. His heart was pounding, but he noticed something strange. Whenever she walked beside him, the fear felt less sharp, almost dulled. He remembered the purring sound and wondered if she was doing it without making it audible. They reached an intersection, and she froze. Through the left corridor, Jack saw 3 armed soldiers standing guard near a wide hatched door. Beyond that door, the shape of an escape pod was visible. He felt hope rise in his chest. She crouched beside him, her amber eyes locking with his. "Go. There," she whispered, pointing at the pod. "But fight." Jack glanced at the soldiers. "There's 3 of them. We'll never make it." She didn't argue. Instead, she leaned in, so close he could feel her breath against his ear. The low purr began again, steady and deep. It wasn't loud, but it was powerful. Jack felt his heartbeat slow and his mind clear, as though his body had been switched into another mode entirely. His fear didn't vanish. It turned into something sharper, like focus. She pulled back slightly and gave him a quick nod. Then she stepped out from behind the wall, moving like a flash of silver. Her blade cut through the first soldier's weapon before he could fire. Jack didn't think. He moved. He lunged at the second soldier, the purr still humming in his chest, guiding his movements. The blade in his hand met armor, and somehow his strike was strong enough to knock the soldier back. The third soldier turned his weapon toward her, but Jack shouted to draw his attention. The moment the soldier turned, she was on him, her blade slicing the weapon in 2. She spun and kicked him down with a force that didn't match her slender frame. When it was over, Jack's breathing was hard, but his hands didn't shake the way he thought they would. She looked at him, her expression unreadable, then nodded once, as if approving his performance. They ran to the hatch door. She tapped the panel, but it flashed red. She cursed under her breath and pulled a small device from her belt. With a few quick motions, the panel clicked green and the hatch opened. Inside, the escape pod was small, with 2 seats and a narrow control panel. Jack slid into one seat, but she paused in the doorway, her gaze scanning the corridor. "Come on," Jack urged. She stepped inside, closing the hatch behind her. As soon as she did, a voice shouted in the distance, followed by the pounding of boots. Jack didn't need to understand the words to know they were in trouble. She hit the launch controls, and the pod shuddered. Through the small front window, the corridor vanished as the pod shot forward. For a brief moment, Jack felt weightless as they were thrown into the black of space. But relief came too soon. Warning lights flashed across the pod's panel, and a loud alarm blared. She hissed something in her language and slammed her hand against the console. The pod shook violently. Jack gripped the seat. "What's happening?" She didn't answer, just fought with the controls. The pod tilted sharply, stars spinning outside the window. Then Jack saw a planet below, green, blue, and covered in swirling clouds. The pod was heading straight for it. The heat outside grew intense as they hit the atmosphere. The whole cabin rattled, and the seat straps dug into Jack's shoulders. She kept her eyes on the controls, hands moving quickly, but the alarms didn't stop. A sudden jolt threw them both forward. Jack's head snapped back against the seat, and for a moment his vision blurred. The pod was dropping fast now, the green surface of the planet rushing closer. She looked at him briefly, her amber eyes calm despite the chaos. "Hold," she said simply. The ground came up in a blur of trees and open fields. Jack braced himself. The impact hit like a hammer, the noise deafening. The pod skidded across the ground, metal scraping until it slammed to a stop. Smoke filled the cabin. Jack coughed, unstrapping himself. She was already on her feet, scanning the view outside. The pod's hatch was jammed halfway open, but she forced it the rest of the way with a sharp kick. Warm air rushed in, carrying the scent of grass and something unfamiliar, almost sweet. They stepped outside. They were in a forest clearing, tall trees surrounding them on all sides. Strange bird-like calls echoed in the distance, and the sky was a deeper blue than any Jack had seen before. She moved quickly, grabbing a small pack from the pod and scanning the tree line. "Danger," she said, pointing to the forest. Jack followed her gaze. Something was moving in the shadows, low to the ground, fast. He couldn't see it clearly, but the way it circled them made his skin crawl. She didn't draw her blade yet. Instead, she stepped close to Jack, pressing her hand to his chest again. The purr returned, stronger this time, and Jack felt his fear drop away. His grip on the blade tightened without trembling. The shapes in the trees drew closer, and he finally saw them, creatures with long, thin limbs and eyes that glowed faintly in the shade. They moved in silence, their bodies blending with the shadows. She stepped in front of him now, finally pulling her weapon free. "Stay. Close," she ordered. Jack nodded, the hum of her purr steady inside him like a heartbeat that wasn't his. The creatures hissed, their glowing eyes narrowing. And then they attacked. The creatures burst from the shadows, their thin limbs moving with frightening speed. Their skin was dark and rough, blending with the trees, and their teeth flashed sharp and white as they lunged. Jack didn't have time to think. The purring in his chest grew stronger, as if pushing his body to move before his mind could catch up. The first creature leapt straight for him, claws extended. Jack stepped to the side instinctively and swung his blade. The metal sliced across its arm, making it screech and tumble into the grass. Another rushed from his left, but before it reached him, she was there, her silver blade flashing in the sunlight. One clean strike sent the creature sprawling. Jack's heart pounded, but he noticed he wasn't shaking. The fear was still there, but it wasn't controlling him. It was as if her strange purr was steadying his hands and sharpening his reflexes. He moved again, blocking another swipe from a snarling attacker, then pushing it back with a kick. The creatures circled, hissing. They weren't mindless. They were testing, watching, looking for weakness. She stepped closer to Jack, her shoulder brushing his, her blade held low and ready. Her amber eyes scanned the tree line with quick precision. One creature suddenly darted toward her, faster than the others. Jack reacted without thinking, moving between them and slashing at it. His blade cut deep, and the creature fell back, writhing in pain before crawling into the shadows. She looked at him for a moment, surprised, then approving. The purr deepened, rolling through his chest like a drumbeat. It was strange, but the sound made him feel almost connected to her, like they were moving as one. More shapes emerged from the trees, too many to fight for long. She gave a short, sharp whistle, and the creatures froze for a split second, startled by the sound. That was all the time they needed. She grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the far side of the clearing, where the ground sloped downward toward a stream. They ran, the sounds of pursuit right behind them. The forest floor was uneven, covered with thick roots and fallen branches. But the strange rhythm of her purring seemed to match his steps, keeping him from stumbling. They reached the stream and splashed through it, the cold water shocking against his bare feet. On the other side, she led him toward a rocky path that wound between two steep hills. The narrow passage forced them to run single file, and the echoes of the creature's cries bounced off the stone walls. Jack glanced over his shoulder and saw them leaping across the stream, their glowing eyes fixed on them. She stopped suddenly, turning to face the way they had come. Jack slowed, confused, until he saw her pulling a small round object from the pack she carried. She pressed something on its surface, and the object began to emit a high-pitched hum. She tossed it into the narrow path they had just run through, then grabbed his arm and pulled him farther up the trail. The explosion came seconds later, a sharp burst of light and sound. The shockwave rattled the rocks around them, and a cloud of dust and smoke filled the passage. The cries of the creatures turned into pained screeches before fading into silence. Jack stopped to catch his breath, leaning against the rock wall. She didn't stop. She climbed higher, scanning the horizon. When he finally caught up, they were standing on a ridge overlooking a vast stretch of forest and rolling hills. In the far distance, the ruins of some large stone structure rose from the trees, half covered in vines. She pointed toward it. "Temple," she said simply. Jack wiped sweat from his forehead. "That's where you want to go?" She nodded. "Need before sundown." He followed her gaze to the sky. The sun here was larger and a deeper orange than Earth's, already sinking toward the horizon. If it set before they reached the temple, he didn't know what would happen, but the urgency in her voice made him believe it would be bad. They started down the ridge, moving quickly. Jack noticed she kept glancing back, checking for movement. Even after the explosion, she didn't believe they were safe. They crossed more forest, this time without immediate attack, though the strange calls of unseen creatures still echoed around them. The air here was thick with the scent of flowers and damp earth. Every so often, she would pause and crouch, touching the ground with her fingers before moving on. It reminded Jack of how hunters track prey. After some time, they reached a small clearing where the sunlight filtered through the trees in golden beams. She stopped here, kneeling beside a patch of tall grass. Jack walked over to see what she was doing. She pulled a small metallic container from her pack, opened it, and scooped some thick, green paste onto her fingers. Without warning, she reached up and smeared it across Jack's neck and jaw. He recoiled slightly. "What is that?" She gave a small smile. "Hide, smell." Jack realized she was covering his human scent so the predators wouldn't track him. She applied the same paste to herself, the faint scent of herbs filling the air. They moved again, this time more cautiously. The temple grew larger with each step, its stone walls cracked and covered in moss. Strange symbols were carved into the rock, some glowing faintly in the fading light. As they approached, Jack noticed movement near the temple's base. More soldiers, their armor reflecting the sunlight. He counted at least 6 of them, and they were guarding the entrance. She stopped behind a fallen tree, crouching low. Her expression was calm, but her eyes were sharp. She pointed to herself, then to the far side of the temple, then to him, gesturing toward the guards. "You want me to distract them?" Jack whispered, surprised. She tilted her head, the faintest hint of a smile on her lips, and then the purr returned, low, steady, and warm in his chest. Jack's pulse steadied instantly. She was telling him without words that he could do this, that she believed in him. He tightened his grip on the blade. The purring sound stayed with him, and for the first time since this began, he felt like maybe he wasn't just running for survival anymore. Maybe he was part of something bigger, something he didn't understand yet, but could feel in every step. The temple waited ahead, and with it, the answers he needed. But first, they would have to get past the guards. The guards stood in 2 lines at the temple entrance, their armor glinting faintly in the setting sun. They held long, spear-like weapons that shimmered with energy, and their eyes were hidden behind dark visors. Jack could feel the tension coming off them even from a distance. These were not random soldiers. They were protecting something important. She stayed crouched behind the fallen tree, studying every movement. Her amber eyes scanned their positions, the timing of their glances, the way they shifted their weight. Jack waited beside her, gripping his blade tighter. The low purring sound began again, soft at first, almost like a whisper inside him. It steadied his breathing and made his heartbeat match the slow, steady rhythm. She finally looked at him and tapped her own chest. "You, a grrr," she said firmly, her voice low but clear. She pressed her palm against her heart, then touched his. "Bond." Jack stared at her, trying to piece it together. "Bond? What kind of bond?" Her gaze didn't waver. "Life, share. My life," she tapped her chest. "Your life," she tapped his. "Linked." He felt a cold shiver run down his spine. Linked? He wanted to ask more, but she was already moving, sliding silently to the right, keeping low. She gestured for him to circle the other way. Jack hesitated, but her sharp, urgent look left no room for refusal. They split up, moving through the tall grass around the temple. Jack crept to the left side, trying to stay low and quiet. Every step felt like it took too long, the grass whispering under his feet. He could hear the faint hum of the guards' weapons, the clinking of their armor as they shifted position. When he reached a spot near the entrance, he caught her eyes from across the clearing. She gave a single nod. Jack understood. It was time. He stood up quickly, making enough noise to draw attention. 2 guards turned toward him instantly, raising their weapons. Jack took a step back, pretending to stumble. One of the guards barked something in their language and advanced. From the corner of his eye, Jack saw her move like a shadow. She was behind the second guard before he even noticed, her blade flashing in the fading light. The guard fell without a sound. The first guard lunged at Jack, swinging the spear. Jack ducked under it and slashed at the soldier's arm. The blow wasn't deep, but it was enough to make him drop his weapon. Jack kicked it away, then pushed the soldier back hard enough to make him stumble into the temple wall. The other guards reacted fast, but she was already among them, moving with deadly precision. Each strike she made was smooth and efficient, cutting through their defenses before they could land a blow. Jack found himself fighting alongside her, their movements almost in sync. He didn't know how, but he could sense where she would move next, like they were sharing instinct. The last guard tried to retreat into the temple, but she threw a small silver disc that spun through the air and struck his armor. It released a burst of light that made him collapse instantly. Silence settled over the clearing. Jack's chest rose and fell quickly, but the purr inside him still hummed steadily. He glanced at her, and for a moment, their eyes locked. He didn't need words to know they had won, because of whatever strange connection a grrr really was. She didn't waste time. She stepped over the fallen guards and moved into the temple entrance. Jack followed, the heavy stone arch casting long shadows over them as they passed inside. The air in the temple was cooler, carrying the scent of old stone and something faintly metallic. Faint symbols glowed along the walls, their light pulsing in slow waves. The corridor was wide but strangely empty, the sound of their footsteps echoing softly. Jack glanced around, uneasy. "You sure this is where you need to be?" She didn't answer right away. Instead, she touched one of the glowing symbols with her fingertips. The wall seemed to breathe under her touch, the glow brightening. She looked back at him, her face serious. "Here, save me." The words caught him off guard. "Save you? From what?" She stepped closer, her gaze locked on his. "Curse." "Heart, stop, soon." She pressed his hand against her chest. Her heartbeat was fast, too fast, like a drum running out of control. Only a grrr, heal. Jack stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. "You mean me? I can fix this? How?" She shook her head slowly. "Bond? Complete. Then I live." Before he could ask what completing the bond meant, a sound echoed through the temple, a deep, low rumble that made the floor vibrate. The symbols on the walls flared brighter for a moment, then dimmed again. She turned quickly, grabbing his hand and pulling him deeper into the temple. They passed through a massive hall where towering statues lined both sides, their faces worn and cracked with age. The rumble came again, louder this time, like something huge was waking up beneath them. At the far end of the hall, a large stone door blocked the way. In its center was a round indentation, glowing faintly. She gestured toward it, then to him. "Your hand." Jack stepped forward, placing his palm in the indentation. The stone was cold at first, then warmed under his touch. A pulse of light spread outward, and the heavy door began to rise with a grinding sound. Beyond it was a chamber bathed in golden light. At its center stood a pedestal with a crystal that glowed like fire. She walked toward it slowly, almost reverently. Jack followed, feeling the weight of the moment. The crystal's light reflected in her eyes as she turned to him. "This bind us. Forever." Before he could respond, the rumble returned, shaking dust from the ceiling. From the shadows above, shapes began to move, massive stone creatures with glowing eyes, stepping down from their places against the walls. She looked at him once more, her voice low but steady. "Protect me." A grrr. Jack tightened his grip on the blade, the purr in his chest roaring louder than ever. Whatever completing the bond meant, it looked like they'd have to survive this fight first. The stone creatures moved with heavy, deliberate steps, each one larger than a man. Their bodies were carved from dark rock, but their joints glowed faintly, as if something alive pulsed inside them. Their eyes shone a bright gold, locking on Jack and the alien girl. The sound of their movements echoed through the chamber, a deep grinding mixed with a faint hum that made the floor vibrate. Jack's grip on the blade tightened. His chest pounded, but the low purring from her direction started again, slow and steady. It was enough to calm the wild panic in his head, replacing it with focus. She stepped closer to the pedestal, glancing at him once. "Hold them," she said firmly. The first creature reached them, raising a massive arm. Jack rolled to the side as the stone limbs smashed into the floor, sending cracks through the ground. Dust rose around them. He slashed at the arm with his blade, but the strike barely left a mark. The creature turned its glowing eyes toward him, unfazed. Another one advanced, forcing Jack to back up toward the wall. He noticed they were slower than they looked, strong but deliberate. That gave him an idea. He waited until the first one swung again, then ducked at the last second. The heavy arm smashed into the second creature instead, knocking it off balance. He didn't have time to celebrate. A third one came from the side, its glowing eyes fixed on her. Jack ran forward, shouting to draw its attention. It turned toward him, just as he dived low and slashed at the glowing joints in its legs. This time, the blade cut deeper, and the creature staggered before falling to one knee. She was still at the pedestal, her hands moving over the crystal as if she was unlocking something. Light began to swirl inside it, brightening with each passing second. Jack could feel the warmth from across the room. The creatures grew more aggressive, moving faster. One swung a massive fist toward her, but Jack intercepted it, the impact jarring his entire arm. He pushed forward with all his strength, the strange energy from the purring fueling him. For a moment, it felt like his body wasn't entirely his. It was stronger, faster, more precise. Two of the creatures tried to corner him. Jack dodged one strike and let it crash into the wall, then turned on the other, striking at its glowing joints until it cracked and fell apart. The pieces of stone crumbled to the floor, the golden light inside them fading away. The sound of the purring grew louder, not from her throat this time, but inside his chest, as if the bond between them was pulling tighter. He glanced back and saw her eyes closed, her hands pressed to the crystal. The light now surrounded her completely, outlining her in a golden glow. One last creature remained, the largest of them all. It stepped forward slowly, its golden eyes fixed on both of them. Jack moved to block its path, feeling the heat of the crystal's light on his back. The creature swung both arms down in a crushing blow. Jack rolled to the side, but the shockwave from the strike knocked him off balance. It raised its arm again, and Jack knew he wouldn't dodge in time. But before it could hit, a flash of silver moved past him. She had left the pedestal. Her blade sliced into the glowing joint of the creature's arm, cutting deep. The golden light inside it flared, then dimmed as the arm broke away completely. The creature roared, turning toward her, but Jack was already behind it. He leapt forward, driving his blade into the joint at the back of its leg. The creature collapsed to one knee, and she finished it with a final strike to its chest. The golden light within it flickered, then faded. Silence filled the chamber. Only the faint hum of the crystal remained. Jack turned to her, breathing hard. The golden glow around her was brighter now, wrapping around both of them. She stepped closer, her hand reaching for his. When their palms touched, the glow pulsed once, sending a wave of warmth through him. She looked up into his eyes. "Bond complete," she said softly. The purr returned, deeper than ever, and this time Jack felt it spread through every part of him. His exhaustion faded, replaced by a strange, powerful calm. The crystal's light dimmed, but the glow between them remained, a thin thread of gold connecting their hearts. She smiled faintly, her breathing slowing. "I live. Because you." Jack didn't know what to say. His mind was still spinning from the fight, from the strange warmth in his chest, from the way her eyes seemed to hold him in place. But before he could speak, the ground beneath them shook again. Not from danger, but from the massive stone door opening wider. Beyond it, sunlight poured in. The storm of dust and darkness from before had cleared, and the view outside showed the forest stretching far and wide. She stepped toward the doorway, still holding his hand. They walked out together into the warm air. The temple stood silent behind them, its guardians gone. She stopped at the edge of the steps, looking out over the land, then turned to him. "Now, we fight together. Always." Jack nodded slowly, still feeling the strange hum in his chest, knowing it would never leave. Whatever a grrr truly meant, it was more than just a word. It was a promise, one sealed in battle, bound by something neither of them could break.